Is there a place in time where logic breaks down and wonderment begins? Could that be somewhere at some time along an infinite line between the reasonable and the highly unlikely? Join us on a journey into the improbable. Makeshift Stories presents episode 326, The Tenacity Hack, read by Steve Peterson. Opening and closing theme by Matthew Erdman. Somewhere and sometime, survival might lead to choices that conflict with your moral compass.
As I stepped out, a sudden gust of grit-filled wind tried to rip the fifth wheel's beat-up aluminum door from my hand. I kept my mouth shut. The local dust was determined to work its way into clothes, coffee, teeth, and probably your soul if you stood still too long. Janet X's fields spread beyond the struggling windbreak, bright green sprouts of drought-hardened canola infecting the exhausted soil. Her family had been coaxing crops out of it for 5 generations, which made Janet stubborn, sentimental, and deeply committed. By any rational measure, the plants should have been dead. It was the first thing I noticed when Janet took me in 2 months earlier. The second was that she avoided talking about it, quickly changing the subject whenever I brought it up. She let me stay in the rusting trailer her ex had abandoned on her property. In exchange, I piloted drones, generated soil and growth stats, and pretended I had once flown delivery bots for a living, and Janet pretended to believe me. The arrangement had worked so far and appeared to be the norm around here, where everyone seemed to have a shadowy, storied past. Mine involved corporate lawyers, arrest warrants, and at least one former client with the budget to make long-distance grudges stick. Things best kept swept under the rug. On the horizon you could just make out the skeletal remains of a grain elevator. It marked the location of Neville. One truck stop, one motel, an on-again, off-again store, and enough illegal firmware to jailbreak half the farm equipment in the hinterland. The place sat between the Great Plains Economic Zone and the Central Primacy States. In a strip of prairie no one was interested in claiming, and even fewer willing to live in. A door banging shut caught my attention, and I looked toward the house. Cursing, Janet was crossing the yard, head down against the wind, one fist clenched around a crumpled printout. Out here, bad news still came on paper. Electronic files could change between glances. Paper fixed words in ink and dead trees. She shoved the wadded sheet at me. "This is a pile of crap, right?" I straightened it out. The message claimed patented canola had been detected on Janet's property. She had 3 days to negotiate a deal, or the evidence would end up in the hands of Agrigrola's IP enforcement group. I read it again, Janet watching my reaction. "Well?" she demanded. I looked past her at the fields freckled with vibrant green leaves. It hadn't rained since I arrived. Her canola, while it hadn't grown, hadn't withered and browned either, which meant it was putting all its energy into deeper roots. A patented smart drought response, only one company licensed, and it came with a steep price. "You used unlicensed seed?" I accused. Her eyes hardened. "No. It's a local heirloom varietal, developed the old way, selective breeding, took decades. You got a problem with that?" The answer came too fast and too well rehearsed. Janet glared at me. For a second, I felt like I needed more than dust-filled air between us. "The seed's legal." She grabbed the printout from my hand. Somewhere north of 50, just 5 feet tall in boots, covered in wind-worn denim and an ancient ball cap from some long-gone team, she looked like the prairie had eroded her down to essentials. Her mouth tightened, somehow preserving the permanent smile sandblasted into her face. Janet X was almost certainly not the name her parents gave her. In Neville, names tended to be borrowed or made up, and true identities buried along with the rest of the evidence. "There's no patented crop on my land." She shifted forward. daring me to contradict her. But I knew from experience that bravado could be a thin veneer over guilt. "He claims to have evidence." "The notice is a shakedown," she insisted. "Maybe." "Maybe. It's all local seed, all old-school farming." She worked her jaw around the words, looking out toward her fields. The squat canola seemed to contradict her. The stuff was too damn healthy for a place where rain was about as reliable as public transit on a holiday. "Old school and maybe something else," I suggested, wanting to see her reaction. She looked back at me, calculation behind her eyes, like a mechanic listening to an engine knock and deciding how long it could be ignored. "You always this suspicious?" "Only when the answer sounds too rehearsed." A gust of wind rattled the fifth wheel's aluminum siding. I had lived in worse places, although they usually didn't have wheels and lacked the aroma of manure. 2 months ago, an auto transport had dumped me at Neville's truck stop after it got bored with my company somewhere east of Medicine Hat. Janet found me there, looking like a person who had run out of money and geography. She never asked many questions. That's why I owe her. That's why I knew she was hiding something. People who don't ask questions usually have ones they don't want to answer. "What proof does the guy have?" she asked. "Give me that notice again." I uncrumpled it. The language wasn't quite crude enough for a would-be troll and was too specific. It referenced an Agrigrola dryland crop patent and cited a fluorescent marker found on Janet's land. On the other hand, the demand for an under-the-table payment was pure troll. "You might not want to ignore this." Janet swore under her breath. "We grow our own seed. Always have. That's how this place survives." The answer sounded a bit like justification. "Okay, then. Where do you think he's staying?" Janet almost laughed. "The Prairie View? Where else?" "Right. There was nowhere else. The Prairie View. It rented rooms by the hour, and there was a premium for ones that still locked." "I'll go meet him," I volunteered. "You? I've dealt with people like him before." She studied me longer than I liked. "Thought you flew delivery drones." "I did other things, too." "That's an evasive answer." "Maybe," I said. "But it's the answer I've got. Now who's suspicious?" Her eyes swung over to her fields again. I thought she was going to tell me to stay out of it. Then she made some kind of calculation. Farm operations are built on calculation. Rainfall, yields, days until frost, and how much debt a person can tolerate before the bank, the weather, or some corporate parasite swallows the hard work of generations. "Fine," she shrugged. "The jerk's name is Hugo Rossi. Bring me what he's got. I'm guessing some doctored scan." I tucked the notice into a jacket pocket. "First, I'm going to observe him." "Why?" Janet's eyes narrowed. "A good detective gets as much intel on a target as possible before a face-to-face." "You a detective now?" "When haven't I been?" I stopped myself from saying going with. "I've read a few books, even took the PI license test once." "Did you pass?" "Think I'd be working as a farmhand if I had?" Janet knew not to push any harder. My old IP cop instincts kicked in before I finished talking, and I turned toward the Quonset to grab one of her small field monitoring drones. It was muscle memory, not always a good thing. It let trouble in before I even opened the front door. Behind me, Janet called, "Kenzo." I stopped. "This guy's just a troll, right?" "And if he's something else?" I asked. She didn't answer. I kept walking. The Prairie View Motel had been optimistically built just before the fossil fuel markets collapsed. It was still the largest structure in town, featuring 18 rooms, 9 rentable, 6 with locks. Just like the last time I had been there, the rutted parking lot was half filled with abandoned delivery trucks feigning business, bait for the infrequent traveler. Lacking rust, stone chips, and dents, Hugo's dust-covered rental was easy to spot. I crouched behind the humming vending machines outside the office, their shelves crammed with expired stimulant patches and freeze-dried noodles. For a few crypto chits, Anne, the owner, desk clerk, and maid, promised to warn me if Hugo was coming my way. I was about to nod off when the door to number 4 creaked open, and a guy who was a few too many greasy diners away from being in tip-top shape walked out. He was lugging a big suitcase and made a beeline for the rental. There was something distinctive about how he carried himself, maybe cop or military. I shelved that detail away. How do you trail someone in a landscape so flat and devoid of features that a gopher becomes a significant landmark? Hint: you don't use a car. I positioned the small drone I had borrowed from Janet above and behind the rental, in the blind spot. Hugo swung out of the parking lot, then headed west out of town, pulling off the road behind the first windbreak. He got out, making it look like he was taking a leak behind a struggling lilac, and checked the horizon. He missed my drone, silently hovering over his head at 500 feet. This wasn't my first rodeo. Years of tagging patent infringements in public spaces had taught me a few tricks. With the camera lens tight on the action, I watched Hugo's hands as he deftly pieced together a modified cargo drone and filled its hopper with seed packets from the suitcase. From my high vantage point, I followed the drone as it soared a kilometer down the road to a freshly sown field. There, a hatch slid open beneath the drone, scattering seeds onto the earth below. Gotcha. I hit save vid on the controls and noted the GPS. After Hugo headed back to town and parked at Neville's only restaurant and store, I slipped away to borrow one of Janet's pickups and grab one of the few things I had salvaged from my former life, a portable gene mod scanner. You can take the job away from the cop, but you can't take the cop out of the person. 3 hours later, I was standing in the spot where Hugo's drone had dropped its load. Invisible laser light shot out from the scanner, fluorescing the seeds scattered on the ground. Familiar color bands lit up its tiny screen. I didn't need the manual. I knew each of the unique corporate markers from my IP agent training. The seed would be scattered by the wind, eventually contaminating the neighboring fields. It was a classic patent troll tactic. Plant infringing seeds, wait until they germinate, scan the infected land, then strong-arm the locals into a deal, or if they refuse, turn them in and collect the bounty from the patent holder. Take your cash and move on to the next juicy target. Yet something seemed off. What was Hugo's real game? I took a table next to the plate glass window and stared out at the autonomous rigs lined up like cattle at a water trough, lapping up 220 from the Chargers. Judging from the layers of grime, a few had been there a long time, waiting for a new gig. A couple of their ride-along mechanics exchanged war stories in the back corner. They were drifters who traded on-site repairs for the right to sleep in the rigs' cabs. An arrangement not all that different from mine, although I had no intention of becoming one of them. The cafe was attached to the service station by a short hall that contained the washrooms, and it smelled of burnt coffee, grease, and soil. I picked up the cracked tablet, thumbed through the menu again, decided that none of the microwaved options looked appealing, then spotted Hugo's rental pulling into the parking lot. Dressed in a shirt and jeans carefully chosen not to stand out, Hugo opened the driver's door, checking his surroundings before fully committing. Something only a PI, cop, or criminal with a past would do. I donned my red Neville baseball cap. It was how he was going to ID me. The door swung open, and a gust of dust-filled wind blew Hugo in. Ignoring the drifters, he looked around, and then headed straight for my table. "Kenzo?" "Yeah, that's me," I nodded. "Hugo Rossi," he confirmed, and sat down without asking. "So, you're going to negotiate for Miss X?" He laughed. "I know that's not her real name." He dropped a report on the table. "Take a look while I get a coffee." "Very brave of you," I joked. "I've learned to like truck stop brew." He shrugged, got up and walked away. I grabbed the report and examined it. A standard field scan highlighting patent-protected plants. She doesn't have a subscription with Agrigrola. I looked up, and Hugo was standing beside me, sipping a steaming cup. A confident smile was pasted to his face. Want a deal now? I waited until he had slipped into the chair across from me. When you have a trump card, sometimes it's best not to play it until you see more of the deck. Maybe. What's it going to cost? He put down his cup, placed his elbows on the table, folded his hands and leaned forward. A lot of crypto end, he whispered. And maybe a bit more. Depends on what you've got. You'd have to be blind not to realize that crypto's in short supply around here. What's your real game? I played a card and showed him the vid on my phone. He spread his hands and smiled. Just helping out the local crops, he said, without losing a beat. I flipped to the scan of the seed he'd spread. You're a troll, I accused, carefully watching his eyes. There was no surprise or concern. Nicely played, but you're reading this wrong. He pulled an ID card from his shirt pocket and dropped it on the table. Agent Rossi, Enforce Group. He was a damn IP cop. I knew there was something about the way he carried himself. Cop or troll? Did it really matter? Janet was in dire trouble. Hugo pulled out a small data screen, dropped it on the table, and shoved it toward me. What's this? A map of the area. Take a look, Hugo encouraged. I used a spoon to slide it toward me. Don't want your DNA hitching a ride on a strange device? That's something I'd do. Most folks would never think of that. I ignored the comment, silently cursing myself. What am I looking at? A map of the region. Notice anything? Neville lay at the center of a white zone. Filled with numbered red blisters, the rest of the map looked like a severe case of smallpox. There's no colored dots around Neville. I'm glad you can read a map. He pasted on a smile. Those dots are crop subscriptions for our clients' products. They're everywhere except around here. I wonder why, he grinned. They're using naturally adapted local heirloom seed. Bull. The only crops that can survive in this climate are gene-modded hybrids. If you've got any info that could enlighten me about how Ms. X and her neighbors are doing it au naturel, I'll turn a blind eye to her infringements. Agrigrola owns all the patents, he continued. They hired us to find out why that hole in their map exists. I had to admire the guy's persistence, playing a losing hand. Well, he left me no choice. I put my cards on the table. Interesting. Hugo, if you don't get out of town, a video of you salting a field with your client's IP might somehow end up online. I smiled. I'm sure Enforce Group and Agrigrola won't want their images tarnished. They'll throw you under the bus, call you a freelance troll, and hang you out to dry. Hugo leaned back in his chair, eyeing me thoughtfully. Hey, I think I've seen you somewhere before. Did you ever work in Cascadia or have anything to do with, say, genetics? My heart skipped a few beats at that name. I did my best to hide my surprise. No. We both knew I was lying. Are you sure? I seem to recall something about a guy who worked at Say Genetics, failing to report a human embryo trafficking scheme to let a woman and her daughter escape. Maybe you knew the guy or heard of him or something. They were innocent pawns, I wanted to yell. The elite designer baby salon the mother worked for made unlicensed mods on the kid, so the mother would keep mum about their backroom sales. But this guy wouldn't care. He was corporate IP all the way through. Instead, I lied. No, wouldn't know anything about that. But I know enough about the law to recognize dirty evidence when I see it. Too bad. Hugo pocketed the data screen. I was going to offer to make that guy's problems go away if he was willing to figure out the source of those heirloom crops that are somehow mimicking Agrigrola's patented dryland seed. My bet's on hacked stock. Might just be your employer. Or maybe the entire town. I've seen it before." Hugo stretched, then got up. I was tempted to stop him. It was the kind of break I dreamed of. It was the kind of deal I needed. Then I thought about the mum and daughter I had stashed away. The old Kenzo needed to stay buried. He dropped a card on the table. "Call me if you change your mind." Conflicted, I watched him walk to his rental. He got in and turned onto the road out of town. Heirloom crops? I had my doubts. When I got back to the farm, Janet was in the Quonset, setting up to print a new prop for one of her crop drones. The machine sat in pieces on the table. Props, circuit boards, plastic struts and screws everywhere. I picked up part of a camera housing, pretending to be interested. I got the plans off the net. Janet rotated the model of the replacement prop on her screen. Generic processor, motors and printed parts, including the prompts to vibe code a custom control system. Everyone around here uses this plan with a few variations. She swiveled around to face me, trying to hide her concern. I leaned against the work table. Janet could build and modify her own drones. What else were she and the locals capable of? "How'd the meeting go?" she asked, nervously picking up the broken prop and playing with it. "I used that drone you lent me to follow the guy. Caught him salting your neighbor's fields with unlicensed seed." Janet relaxed. So he was a troll after all? I told myself I was protecting her, but the truth was uglier, something I didn't want to admit. Hugo had tempted me, and some broken part of me wanted to take his offer. Yeah, showed him a vid I made. He decided it was in his best interest to leave town while he still could. You won't be seeing him again. What I didn't say was there'd be someone else. Big agritechs don't walk away when they suspect their IP's been compromised. Anything else? Like, why did he target Neville? It's not exactly flush with cash. Just the next town on his map, I guess, I suggested without enthusiasm. Smart woman. She wasn't convinced. Still, seems weird. The guy wouldn't have gotten much. I'm headed to town. Need anything? She left with suspicion on both sides and would probably check out my story. No one at the truck stop had overheard us. Hugo and I were too professional for a rookie mistake like that. I waited until the dust contrail confirmed that Janet was headed to town, then returned to the fifth wheel and dug out the microcams. They, along with the GeneMod scanner, were all I had left from my private investigator business. I placed one in a tree and the other on the roof of the Quonset. Together, they would give me a full view of Janet's yard. I turned them on to record and went back to my usual routine, playing Canola Shepherd during the day, and at night, with a little help from the local distillery, doing my best to forget the bad choices that got me here. A couple of days later, I found myself regretting the latter, as I woke with a headache. Rain pounded the thin roof of the fifth wheel. At first I didn't recognize the sound. It had been so long, but weather doesn't come in moderation anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet. "Take the day off. Tomorrow I'll need your help assessing the damage. Hope your local heirloom seed is part bulrush." I texted back, then took a quick look outside. The yard was a muddy swamp. Janet, wearing bright yellow boots and rain gear, plodded over to her favorite pickup and drove away. I looked around for something to do, then remembered the cameras. I brewed a pot of coffee and settled in to review their recordings. At 10 times normal speed, it still took an hour to find something unexpected. I checked the timestamp, 1:30 a.m. The yard lights were off, forcing the cameras to switch to infrared. Janet must have left her house via the back door, an attempt to avoid crossing the yard in front of the fifth wheel. She slunk along the windbreak, pausing to check for drones, eventually stopping at the first granary. She checked around again before opening a small hatch and disappearing inside. 3 hours further on in the recording, the granary hatch slowly opened. Janet poked her head out, looked around, then exited. The other night she did the same thing. I wanted to ignore what I was seeing, destroy the recordings, and go back to the way things were before Hugo arrived. I could make that guy's problems go away if he were willing to find the source of those heirloom crops. Hugo's words circled in my mind. 4 years ago, the choice would have been easy. Take the offer. But I wasn't sitting in a Vancouver condo tower overlooking False Creek, bank accounts flush with bounties and bonuses. As if to remind me where I was, the rain and wind picked up, shaking the trailer. Then there was that case in the Capitol, the illegal chimera dog, when I was playing at private investigator. Back then, I had let the money speak, and where had that gotten me? I got up and retrieved a half-full bottle from the back of the kitchen cupboard, poured myself a generous drink, then replayed one of Janet's secret midnight forays. I owed that woman. Who else would take in someone obviously fleeing their past and not ask any questions? I should really do the same. But it wasn't in my nature to leave a mystery unsolved. I ripped holes for my head and arms in a plastic garbage bag, wriggled into it, and headed out into the storm. The hatch in the side of the corrugated metal granary opened easily, and I stepped through into the dark interior. My runners had become a muddy mess, and water dripped from the plastic garbage bag. I removed both, intending to clean up on my way out, and felt around on the wall until I found a light switch. Cool white LEDs flooded the space. The lab was modest as far as backroom operations go. There were a couple of old gene sequencing rigs, with the red and yellow biohazard warnings scraped off, patched-up fermentation tanks plastered with handwritten notes, and hydroponic racks with recently harvested canola and wheat stalks. A half-full seed bin slouched next to a workbench that had seen better days. On it, 2 terminals blinked at me, hoping to be woken. In front of them, an ancient GeneMod scanner, held together with duct tape, lay abandoned. Out of habit, I lifted it and shone it into the bin. Negative. Sort of. Good enough to pass inspection from an overhead drone. Close up, there was a faint color band in the readout, a residual from an artificial marker. Then I noticed a small container of seed marked untreated. I swung the scanner around like a handgun and pulled the trigger. Its screen lit up like a color selector in an imaging program. Agrigrola, Northern Bioseed, Syntatic, and others. I almost dropped the scanner. Janet was standing behind me. "How'd you know I was in here?" "Hard to miss. Your muddy footprints led from the fifth wheel directly here. How'd you plan to cover them up, or don't you care, because you've already called it in?" She planted her feet and folded her arms. There was no way to get past her, and I wasn't going to try. She was small, but I had no doubt who had more at stake and who had spent their life hoisting heavy things. "I guess I knew you would eventually figure it out. You're no ex-delivery drone pilot. I could tell that right from the start. Who are you? An undercover IP cop?" "Never been undercover." I was tempted to spill my guts, but had already said too much. I liked Janet, but it didn't mean I trusted her. Last time I took a person at face value, I ended up with a designer pup in the passenger seat while being chased by the villains and the law. I wasn't about to put my neck in the noose again. And you're no simple farmer. I'm done being lied to. The veins in Janet's neck began to pop. Her face reddened. "You're from the city. You wouldn't have understood. Things are not simple, even in a place like this that no one wants, until there's something they accidentally discover. We're just hanging on, Kenzo. Do you have another name?" I shook my head. "Whatever. I doubt you'd tell the truth. What matters is that this town survives despite big agrotech. Given the chance, they'd bleed us dry like the Duvals in the next county. The Duvals played the game, bought the licenses, the sterile seed, the chemicals, the applicator, the whole shebang. Worked great for a couple of years. Then we had the big blows, century floods, tornadoes, then a heat dome, followed by an early frost, complete crop failure, but Agrigrola still got paid. Next year, it was hail, and the company repossessed the equipment. After that, a new strain of pesticide-resistant bugs, and the company owned their land. Janet marched to the unmarked seed bin and grabbed a handful. These are liberated from all that. They're fertile. You keep part of the crop to plant next year. That was the way it used to be until biotech stepped in. My grandfather saved seeds from rotting in sealed silos. I saved seed from encryption. Same job, worse century. We're not getting rich, we're surviving. I'm not sure the courts will see it that way. Janet threw the seed down and wheeled on me, balling her fists. There are no courts in the hinterlands, only debt and dependence backed by threats that pass from one generation to the next. I knew she was right, but it was still illegal. I had spent years enforcing IP licenses to protect and encourage innovation. That slogan had been drilled into every cop and still infected my veins. Images from the last few years flashed through my mind. Embryo trafficking, life extensions for the 1%, people getting in the way and getting murdered. Were the few I had managed to help still okay? Maybe it was time for a complete transfusion. But what are you going to do, Kenzo? I pulled my cell phone out and stared at it. I really wanted my life back. A single call might give me the chance to walk away. Might. I looked at Janet. Despite her sharp edges, she was as fragile as the town. One call and both would be broken. I put my phone away, picked up her gene mod scanner again, and pressed a sequence of buttons. It gave a discordant chime. I just wiped its memory. When you're playing against the likes of Enforce, you can't leave evidence lying around. It's probably best I leave. What I didn't say was that Hugo and Enforce had my number. It was leverage they would use sooner or later. Do you always take the easy way out? Janet leaned against the workbench, folding her arms. Someday you're going to have to take a stand. But not today. I smiled half-heartedly. I'm going to leave you a copy of that recording of Hugo salting the fields. If another agent comes nosing around, remind them that you've got it. It didn't take long to pack my things, the scanner, cameras, a few clothes, and a new bottle from the local distillery Janet gifted me. She had also loaned me, as long as I didn't bring it back, the beat-up pickup that had been sitting behind the Quonset. It won't pass an inspection, she laughed, if there still were any, but it might give you a running start against your past. I thanked her, accepted the keys, and went back to the fifth wheel for one last pass. I dug out Hugo's card and typed the number into my message app. Janet's clean. It's time for you to move on to other targets. I still have that footage of you salting the fields, and now Janet does too. It only stays offline if you and Enforce don't come back. As a sign of good faith, here's a freebie. I overheard someone in town talking about resupplying their seed stock near a place called Roblin. Here's the GPS. It's across the border in the primate, and the kind of rumor your clients would want you to chase. If he took the bait, Hugo would find himself staking out an abandoned grain elevator. I read it again, then hit send. A second later, I got his response. Understood, but blank spaces on the corporate map don't stay open forever. Give my best to that mom and daughter you got stashed away somewhere. I hear Say Genetics is still interested. I gritted my teeth. When I got back outside, I threw my bag behind the old truck seat and got in. Janet came out of her house carrying a plastic bag. She walked up to the open passenger window and dangled it inside. She had scribbled "cleaned" on the bag. Seed? I don't want to be caught with that. Take it. She leaned in and dropped it on the seat. It's my special strain. No markers, it's not illegal. She winked. Give it to someone who needs a future. Then keep this. I handed her one of my microcams. Position it at the turn to the main road. It'll give you a heads up in case you need to clean up before unexpected guests arrive. The thing about a small town is that it disappears between glances in the rearview mirror. In a couple of minutes, all that was left of Neville was the skeletal tip of the old grain elevator, then nothing. The fields I drove past hadn't drowned in the recent deluge. Custom-designed leaves and genetically modified roots defied the odds and survived. The agritechs would keep digging, Janet would keep hacking, and the people of Neville would keep planting. The treeless prairie rolled by, stretching to the horizon in every direction, so much space and nowhere to go. I glanced over at the plastic bag of seed on the passenger seat. No corporate markers, it would pass a casual scan, but plant it and eventually its past would become obvious. That made two of us.
Hi, I'm Vern, the producer and writer behind Makeshift Stories. Thanks for listening to the Tenacity Hack. I hope you liked it. I'd like to ask you a small favor. 3 years ago, our podcast network shuttered its doors. We chose to become independent rather than join another network that would require ads. This allows us to remain ad-free, but we no longer have network support for promotion or discoverability. As a result, Makeshift Stories has become harder to find. You can help by rating the podcast, leaving a quick review, sharing it with friends, or even doing all three. Thank you so much for tuning in and for any support you can give. If you'd like to connect with us, please email makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. Makeshift Stories is released in the first week of each month. This month's story was written by Vern Hume, aka Alan V. Hare, and read by Steve Peterson. Opening and closing themes were composed and recorded by Matthew Erdman. Audio production and editing by Vicata Studios. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial, attribution, no derivative license.